The clock ticks louder as I sit alone, my fingers gripping the phone, staring at my daughter Leah's message. Sorry, Mom. We'll reschedule your appointment later. We're going furniture shopping. Still, I take a breath, holding back the sting. As I look around at the empty house, the silence between us thickens, and I realize how little they've really seen me. While they pick out new furniture for their perfect life, I make a quiet decision. That's when I rearrange everything, not for them, but for me. They'll never sit in this house again. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The doctor paused, as if waiting for her to change her mind, but Lorraine was unwavering. The fight wasn't hers anymore. After a moment, he nodded, taking notes. Okay, but let me know if you change your mind. We can always revisit options. Lorraine simply smiled, her heart already settled. Thank you, she said, then stood to leave, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her like a gentle, inevitable tide. That evening, Nina arrived, the weight of her own quiet worry hanging over her. She didn't ask many questions, just sat with Lorraine, bringing dinner and the kind of warmth that only someone who truly understood could provide. She stayed with Lorraine most nights now, just being there, filling the space with presence rather than words. Carolyn, too, filled in the gaps. She visited often, always bringing something, a newspaper, a cup of tea, a joke. And when she couldn't be there physically, she checked in, a constant thread of support woven through Lorraine's quiet decline. But even in all the closeness, Lorraine felt the distance. The quiet understanding that some things were just hers to hold, that no amount of care could take away the weight of what she had chosen. Melanie, predictably, had reached out, though it had taken her longer than Lorraine expected. An email came one evening, her message blunt, full of urgency. I need to know what's going on with the will. You can't just change everything without telling us. What did you do with everything? Lorraine stared at the message, the words sharp and familiar. She didn't respond. Instead, she forwarded it to Deidre, knowing there was no point in a conversation. The reply came quickly. You are not listed. Lorraine sat back in her chair, the weight of that simple statement settling into her bones. She didn't feel anger, only a deep, quiet resignation. The years of giving, of hoping for something different, were gone. Melanie had made her choices long ago. Funny, Lorraine thought, how people only reach out when they feel they're losing something they never earned. That night, Gracie's name flashed on the screen. Lorraine hesitated before answering, but ultimately let the call go to voicemail. The message was brief. Grandma, I'm sorry for everything. Lorraine stared at the screen, hearing the same words she had heard from Melanie, but now it came with a new tone, a vague attempt at redemption. Lorraine deleted it without listening again. She had already made her peace with their absence, with the silence they had left in their wake. Some things, Lorraine thought, were better left unsaid. The silence, this final decision, was all the truth she needed. Lorraine passed quietly, the final moments draped in stillness. Nina held her hand, fingers pressed lightly against Lorraine's, feeling the last breath slip away. The room, once full of unspoken words and memories, now held only silence. It had been a long, slow goodbye, but now, with the weight of it all, Nina felt the space grow quieter still. Her heart ached, but she didn't cry. She was at peace, knowing that Lorraine had left on her own terms. When the obituary was written, it was simple. Survived by Nina Boyd, no mention of Melanie, no mention of Gracie. There was no malice in it, just truth. Lorraine had made her choice, and Nina was the only one left to carry on that truth. The funeral was small and intimate. Just a handful of people, Carolyn, Nina, a few of Lorraine's old colleagues. It wasn't meant to be a grand affair, and it wasn't. The service was quiet, dignified, no pretense, no dramatics, just the soft echo of a life well lived. Afterwards, Carolyn stood with Nina outside the church, her voice low. She didn't need an audience, she needed witnesses. Nina nodded, her heart heavy. It was true, Lorraine had lived without fanfare, without needing the world to acknowledge her. She had just been, quietly, steadily, for as long as Nina could remember. Later, Nina sat in the living room, holding Lorraine's Bible. She ran her fingers over the pages, worn from years of use. It felt right, this moment of solitude, with the book that had anchored Lorraine's life. Nina opened the Bible to the page where her name had been written months ago. She picked up the pen, adding just a few words. Lorraine Pierce, mother to none but herself, grandmother to none but her truth. With that, she placed the Bible carefully on the mantel. It was done. Lorraine's story, her legacy, now rested there. And Nina knew that, despite everything, her name would never be left off again. The house was still. The air settled, and for the first time in a long time, Nina felt a sense of calm wash over her. There was no more waiting, no more searching for answers. Lorraine's truth would live on, untouched, unwavering, and complete. The letter arrived on a quiet afternoon, its envelope crisp, almost too perfect. Gracie stared at it in her hands. The neat handwriting unmistakable, for Gracie. Lorraine's words, still clear in her memory, echoed in her mind as she slowly opened the paper. Inside was a single sentence. You inherited her silence. Nina inherited her story. The weight of it hit Gracie like a cold wave. The truth, as Lorraine had always known, was harsh, unyielding. Gracie had spent years wondering about the absence of her grandmother, about the fractured relationship. But now the finality was clear. Lorraine's silence had been a quiet but firm choice, a choice Gracie hadn't fully understood until now. She folded the letter, slipping it into her coat pocket, and walked away, her mind racing with the revelation. Meanwhile, Nina had transformed Lorraine's house into something new, something meaningful. The rooms, once quiet with the weight of unspoken words, were now filled with women who sought to reclaim their voices. A literacy space for women in transition, a sanctuary that embodied the very spirit Lorraine had lived by. Quiet strength, unwavering truth. Nina felt Lorraine's presence in every corner of the house, in every book, every conversation. It was where the legacy of love, honesty, and resilience lived on. Lorraine's story had not been erased. It had been shared through Nina's work, through the lives of those who came seeking knowledge, seeking their own stories. Alongside the house's transformation, Lorraine's journal, named and erased, was published. A memoir of a woman who had lived with dignity, who had fought to be seen despite the silence forced upon her. The book spoke not only of Lorraine's life, but also of the truth she had quietly carried for so long. It found an audience, and though Melanie's name was never mentioned, it was clear whose voice had been lost and whose had endured. A voicemail came a few weeks later. Gracie's name flashed across Nina's phone. With a sigh, Nina listened. I understand now, Gracie's voice said, small but earnest. I'm sorry for everything. Nina stared at the phone, the words sinking in. Gracie's apology was the first she'd ever given, but it was too late. There was no need to respond. Nina had made her peace with the past long before this. Melanie remarried soon after Lorraine's passing. The wedding was simple, a new beginning, but there was no mention of the past. No one spoke of Lorraine's sacrifices, of the life she had quietly given up to raise her daughter. Melanie had moved on, discarded the old life, just as she had discarded her own mother. In the backyard, the dogwood tree bloomed once again, its branches heavy with white flowers. It had grown tall, strong, just as Lorraine had hoped. Each year the tree would flower, a quiet reminder of the legacy she had left behind. Nina stood beneath the tree one spring morning, the air still and warm around her. The dogwood's petals fluttered in the breeze, a sign of renewal, of a life lived fully. She smiled softly, knowing that Lorraine's story would never fade. It would continue to grow, just like the tree. My daughter told her friends I was her aunt because she was embarrassed to say I raised her, Lorraine had written once. So I proudly signed everything over to the niece who never lied about loving me. Nina smiled, the weight of Lorraine's words settling in. She had inherited the truth, and with it, the legacy that would never be erased. After a brief wait, the doctor entered. He barely looked up as he reviewed Marjorie's chart. If you miss another checkup, there could be serious consequences, he said flatly. Don't let it happen again. Marjorie nodded, but didn't speak. The words had become familiar, yet they still felt like a shock every time they landed. She'd never asked for pity. And now she didn't expect any. She was just a patient, another face in the endless rotation of checkups and appointments. Missy drove them home in silence, the weight of the day hanging in the air. Marjorie didn't know what she expected when she'd made the appointment. Maybe a little recognition of what she was still trying to hold on to. But it didn't come. When they pulled into the driveway, Marjorie's phone buzzed in her lap. She glanced down. Leah's post was already there. A photo of the sectional she'd been obsessing over for weeks. A bright yellow heart emoji next to it. "Productive day," the caption read. Marjorie stared at the screen, the image of Leah's perfect new furniture juxtaposed against the emptiness she'd felt that afternoon. No one had even bothered to ask how her appointment had gone. No one had checked to see if she was okay. She could feel the anger rising in her chest. But instead of reacting, she locked the phone and tucked it back in her purse. She didn't need any of them, not anymore. Missy had already gone inside. Marjorie took one last look at the house before stepping through the door. The silence inside was just as heavy as the silence outside. The house was quiet when Marjorie returned, the familiar hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the kitchen. She set her purse on the counter, the weight of it somehow heavier than usual, and then pulled out the deed from the bottom, where it had been buried for years. The house, her house, was fully paid off, solely in her name. The ink was faded, but the boldness of the title still rang clear in her mind. "This is mine," she thought. No one could take it from her, not if she made the right moves. She ran her fingers across the document, the cool paper against her skin, and felt a strange relief. It was paid for, all of it. She had built this life, brick by brick, all the while believing it would stay hers until the end. Yet somewhere along the way, she had forgotten that it was her power they were counting on. That same power had been taken for granted, worn down by years of subtle neglect. Marjorie closed her eyes briefly, a memory creeping forward, Leah's wedding all the way back when. She had been there, proud and generous, writing the check for the down payment on Leah's first home. "Thank you, Mom," Leah had said then, her voice sweet, genuine, or at least it had sounded that way. But how easily those words faded over time. How quickly they turned into demands for more money for this, more help for that. And when it came to her own needs, where had they been? Marjorie let the thought linger for a moment, then pushed it away. Her eyes flicked to the photo on the counter, Leah's wedding, the moment when they had shared a promise as mother and daughter. Now, it felt like a different lifetime. What happened to that girl? Her thoughts drifted to another memory, Leah's first car. Marjorie had handed her the keys. A small smile of satisfaction on her face. "This is for you. You deserve it." And Leah had thanked her, a little too quickly, a little too rehearsed. It had been the same pattern, over and over again. Little acts of love, followed by bigger acts of self-interest. But Marjorie had allowed it. She hadn't known then that it would come to this, her sitting in her kitchen, the deed of the house in her hand, knowing the truth that had been building for years. They had been waiting for her to die so they could inherit it all. Missy's voice interrupted her thoughts. "They're counting on what you'll leave behind, not who you are now," she had said the other day, her tone blunt but truthful. She's right, Marjorie thought. Leah and John were so caught up in what they could get, they hadn't stopped to see the woman in front of them, the mother, the one who had quietly supported them for decades, only to be cast aside when she needed them most. Marjorie reached for her phone, tapping Angela Rowe's name on the screen. She needed this done quietly. No fuss. Just a little restructuring of the things that mattered most. She'd learned over the years that things needed to be put into place before you ever needed them. And she wasn't about to let her daughter and son-in-law take what wasn't theirs. "Angela, it's Marjorie," she said when the attorney picked up, her voice steady. "I need to restructure things. Quietly. Let's get this started." Angela's response was quick and sharp. "I'll take care of it. You'll be fine." The line went dead, but it felt like a promise. Marjorie hung up, her pulse steady. This would be the start of something new, something they hadn't expected. She wasn't going to let them walk all over her anymore. As she turned to walk away, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find Kayla, her niece, standing on the other side with a container of homemade soup in her hands. Kayla was a nurse, always thoughtful, always careful. She wasn't here for anything. No requests, no expectations, just a simple gesture of care. "Hey, Aunt Marjorie," Kayla said with a warm smile. "I thought you could use some comfort food. How's everything?" Marjorie felt a lump rise in her throat as she looked at her. Kayla didn't need anything. She wasn't after a piece of Marjorie's life. She just wanted to be there. "Thank you, sweet girl," Marjorie said, taking the soup. "It means a lot." Kayla paused for a moment, her eyes soft. "I know things have been hard, but you don't have to go through it alone." Marjorie swallowed hard, nodding. Kayla's kindness felt like a balm on a wound she didn't even realize was there. She didn't need anything from her, not like Leah, not like John. She just needed to be herself. As Kayla left, Marjorie stood in the doorway for a moment, the soup in her hands. She wasn't going to leave anything behind for Leah and John. Not if it meant they'd just take it for granted. She'd seen how it ended before. She closed the door softly and walked back into the kitchen, setting the soup down on the counter. The world outside was quiet, and inside, she was starting to feel the first stirrings of a plan. Marjorie wasn't just going to let them take it, not this time. Marjorie sat at the oak desk, the papers in front of her sharp and crisp, their edges waiting for her signature. Angela had been precise, walking her through each step as if they were navigating an inevitable course. The room felt smaller, the air thick with something that could have been fear but wasn't. This is the right thing, Marjorie reminded herself. This is necessary. Angela slid the first document over to her, a living trust. Marjorie picked up the pen, the weight of it familiar but now carrying a different kind of significance. She signed the first line, and with each letter, it felt as though something heavy was lifting off her chest. "No one would take anything from me now. The house, your accounts, all of it will be transferred smoothly," Angela said, her voice cool and professional. "This way, no one can challenge it, not even Leah and John. They're out." Marjorie nodded slowly. The words hung in the air, each one a confirmation of what she had already known. Leah and John had been waiting for her to fail, to leave them what they could claim, but they hadn't seen the quiet power she still held. Marjorie had built everything around them, but now she was building something for herself. Angela continued, adjusting her glasses as she flipped through more documents. "I'm adding Kayla as the primary caretaker. Long-term provisions. She'll have control of your estate when you're no longer here. Kayla, Marjorie's niece, the one who had always shown up, who brought her soup without asking for anything. She had never treated Marjorie like a means to an end. In a world where everything felt transactional, Kayla was a rare constant. Marjorie could feel a small smile tug at her lips as she signed the next paper, designating Kayla's role. The trust would keep her protected, and in turn, Kayla would look after the house, the legacy, everything Marjorie had built. Angela glanced at her. "Everything will be airtight. The house transfers outside probate, so they can't contest anything." The idea that Leah and John would be left with nothing, their entitlement shattered, brought a cold satisfaction. They wouldn't even have the chance to ask. They wouldn't know until it was too late. Marjorie placed the pen down, and for a moment the room felt eerily quiet. She let the silence fill the space between them, feeling the gravity of the decision settle deep inside her. Then she stood. "It's done." Angela gave a short nod. "It's done." Later that evening, Marjorie stood in her living room, looking around at the furniture she had once adored. The sofas, the lamps, the bookshelves, all pieces she had accumulated over the years, memories and comfort intertwined with their presence. But none of it would remain. Not anymore. She made a call to a local women's shelter, arranging for the furniture to be picked up the next morning. She hadn't needed it for years, and it was time for it to serve a new purpose. When the movers arrived the next day, she watched as they carefully loaded each piece into their truck, taking away the old reminders of a life she no longer wanted to hold on to. It felt like the final step, detaching herself from the past in a way that had felt impossible before. That night, after the last piece was gone, Marjorie sat down in the empty living room, the house quieter than it had ever been. It was her house now. It was always meant to be hers. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. Leah's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, we need to talk. There's something important we have to discuss." Marjorie paused, her fingers hovering over the screen. She glanced around the room, now stripped bare of its old life. They'll never know until it's too late, she thought. She pressed ignore and set the phone down. Tonight, the only thing that mattered was what she had done. Marjorie heard the knock at the door and knew exactly who it was. Leah's chipper voice filtered through before the door even opened. "Hi, Mom, we're here," Leah greeted, stepping inside with a handful of paint samples, looking more eager than usual. "I thought we could freshen up the living room a little. I brought some colors for you to look at." Marjorie didn't say anything as she stepped back to let them in. Leah breezed past her, already unfurling the paint samples onto the coffee table. The cheerful smile on her face felt too bright, too rehearsed. "Planning a remodel?" Marjorie asked, her tone neutral. Leah glanced up from the samples, her expression barely changing. "Just thinking ahead. You know, freshen up the place. We've been looking at ways to modernize it, make it more open." She fanned out the colors, tapping the edges of each swatch as though she expected Marjorie to approve. John followed her inside, a tape measure slung over his shoulder. Without a word, he began measuring the room, his eyes scanning the space like an architect making mental notes. "We'll probably go open concept once it's ours," he said, as though he'd already planned out the renovations in his head. Marjorie gave them both a quiet, almost invisible smile. "Once it's ours." The words clung to the air, and for a moment she wondered if they even realized how presumptive they sounded. Leah was too busy talking to notice. "We were thinking light gray for the walls, maybe brighten it up a bit. You've always said it's too dark in here." Marjorie didn't respond right away. She just watched as Leah laid out color swatches. The future already mapped out in her mind. "They think they have a say here," Marjorie thought. "They think this house belongs to them already." John moved to the far side of the room, still absorbed in his measurements. He was nodding as if the house was already in his control. "Once we knock down some walls and open this place up, it'll be perfect. Really modern, you know?" Marjorie said nothing. She smiled again, this time a little tighter, and walked away, her mind a steady hum. They hadn't seen it yet. They couldn't see it. The house, the one they thought would be theirs, was already untouchable. The trust was in place. The papers had been signed. The house would transfer to Kayla, not them. She heard them talking behind her, but it felt like they were speaking from a distance. They were too caught up in their plans, their presumptions, to understand the truth. Marjorie wasn't angry. She was just done. She stopped by the kitchen, her fingers grazing the edges of the countertop. The house she had built over the years, with every small decision, every sacrifice, was no longer their playground. This was hers to give, to decide. And now it would be Kayla's. Marjorie glanced toward the counter and saw a letter from Kayla, written in neat handwriting. "You've always shown up. So will I?" A soft smile pulled at the corner of her lips. Kayla had always been there, had never asked for anything, just quietly showed up when Marjorie needed someone. The contrast between her niece's loyalty and Leah and John's greed couldn't have been starker. She tucked the letter into her pocket and turned back toward the living room. Leah was still animatedly describing her vision for the space, and John was nodding, caught up in their plans for an imagined future. But it didn't matter. Their future in this house had already been erased. Marjorie walked past them without a word, feeling the weight of her decisions settle around her. The walls, the space, the furniture, they could paint over it all, but it would never change what was already set in motion. She didn't need to explain. And as she moved toward the door, she knew they would never understand until it was too late. Marjorie flipped through the workbook with methodical precision. "When Mom passes," was underlined more times than she cared to count. She let her fingers linger over the words, feeling the weight of the future pressing down on her. The pages, filled with assumptions and cold calculations, seemed to mock her. They think they know what's coming, she thought. A hard edge creeping into her thoughts. They don't. Missy's voice broke through her quiet contemplation. "Vultures in yoga pants," she muttered as she walked into the room, shaking her head. Marjorie didn't react right away. She closed the workbook, staring at the pages for a moment longer. "They're waiting for me to die," she said, voice steady but quiet. "Like it's a given." Missy took a seat next to her, crossing her arms. "It's sickening how they've been counting on it. Just sitting back, thinking they'll inherit everything when you're gone. Like you owe them something. Marjorie's jaw tightened. They've been planning it for years. They don't see the way things have changed. Her eyes flicked to the phone she had placed on the counter earlier, where she had just installed a security system. She hadn't told anyone about the codes, not even Missy. She wasn't going to leave anything to chance. Kayla's got the guest access codes, she said after a long pause. She'll be the one taking care of things. Missy nodded, her lips pressing into a tight smile. Good. They don't deserve a damn thing. Not a thing. Marjorie didn't respond. She had already made up her mind. The house, the money, everything would go to Kayla. The trust was airtight. No one would contest it. She'd made sure of that. A soft ping from her phone snapped her back to the present. It was a text from Leah. What do you want to do for Thanksgiving? Marjorie stared at the message for a moment, her thumb hovering over the screen. The question felt empty, like an afterthought. Do they even care, she wondered. Do they even know what they've missed? She let out a slow breath and typed back. I'll think about it. She set the phone down, her eyes lingering on the message as if willing the words to vanish. Leah hadn't asked how she was doing in weeks. She hadn't bothered to check in to make sure Marjorie was okay. This wasn't an invitation, it was a convenience. Missy was watching her, reading the tension in the air. They've got no idea, she said. No idea what you're doing or what's coming. Marjorie smiled thinly, a quiet resolve settling in. No, they never do. The truth was simple. They never saw her, never truly understood her. They thought she was just waiting to be taken care of, waiting for them to step in and inherit what she had built. But she wasn't waiting anymore, and soon they would realize they had no claim over anything. Marjorie's fingers brushed the cool metal of the door handle. The weight of the house was behind her, the future already shifting beneath her feet. As she opened the door to step outside, she felt the smallest flicker of peace. It's too late for them, she thought. And this time, she wasn't the one waiting. Marjorie drove to Asheville, the roads twisting through mountains as the colors of fall bled into the horizon. She'd left her phone off the entire time. The silence a welcome change. For the first time in months, she didn't feel the weight of obligations hanging over her. No texts, no calls, just the rhythmic hum of the car and the wind rushing past. When she arrived at Ruth's cottage, the world seemed to slow. Ruth, her old friend, greeted her with a warm embrace. Ruth had always known how to make her laugh, how to fill the spaces that had been hollowed out by years of quiet sacrifice. For 4 days, they walked, talked, and sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Marjorie hadn't realized how much she needed this, how much she needed to disconnect. Ruth didn't ask about Leah or John. There were no expectations, just companionship. Marjorie felt lighter with every passing hour. When she returned home, the quietness of the house felt different. She stepped inside, and her eyes caught a Happy Holidays basket left on the porch, wrapped in festive cellophane. It was from Leah, but the gesture felt hollow. She stared at it for a moment, then turned away, not bothering to open it. Her phone buzzed from inside, but she didn't rush to check it. She knew what it would be. Another text from Leah, another attempt to reach out when it was convenient for her. Later that evening, Marjorie received a call from Angela. Everything's finalized. The no contest clause is in place. It's secure, Angela said, her voice brisk but reassuring. Marjorie felt a quiet satisfaction settle in her chest. The house, the money, it was all out of reach for Leah and John now. They wouldn't get a thing. The next morning, Kayla called, asking to shadow Marjorie's estate process for a class project. Marjorie smiled as she listened, pleased by the request. Kayla had always been the one to show up, the one who understood the value of her time, never asking for anything in return. Marjorie agreed, feeling a quiet sense of pride. Kayla would learn what it meant to handle things properly, without expectation, without manipulation. The house felt quieter than usual, the space filled with the weight of her decisions. She had done it. The future was hers to shape, and soon everyone would see that she had built something that couldn't be taken. But as she stood by the window, she heard the doorbell ring. Marjorie stood still for a moment, then slowly walked toward the door, knowing that whoever it was would find something very different from what they expected. Angela's voice crackled through the phone, a sharp reminder of how things were shifting. Leah's attorney called. They're trying to get access to your estate, asking about your health, your plans. He says they just want to know if things are changing. Marjorie's grip tightened around the mug in her hands, the warmth doing little to soften the anger that stirred within her. Tell them to refer to the silence they gave me at the curb, she replied, her voice steady, though a quiet fire simmered beneath. Angela didn't hesitate. I'll handle it. They're out. The trust is ironclad, and they'll never get in. Marjorie set the phone down, her eyes drifting to the stacks of papers waiting for her. The weight of their presumption, their belief that they could just show up when it suited them, pressed down hard. But it was too late for them to turn back. The next afternoon, Kayla arrived with a stack of file boxes and a look of quiet determination. Ready to get organized? She asked, her eyes full of intent. Marjorie nodded. Let's get everything in the fireproof cabinet. We need it safe, where it belongs. They worked in silence for hours, sorting and filing papers that represented not just money and property, but years of decisions, sacrifices. And now, the final acts of Marjorie's autonomy. Every file Kayla placed in the cabinet, every page turned, was a step further away from the life Leah and John thought they had a claim to. As the last folder slid into place, Marjorie stood and stretched. She'd made sure everything was locked down. Kayla would be the one to carry it all forward, not Leah, not John. Later that day, Missy stopped by, a box of items under her arm. Time to purge, she said with a grin, though her eyes softened when she looked at Marjorie. They went through the things Leah had borrowed over the years, clothes, old furniture, even a few framed photos. Marjorie hadn't forgotten how often Leah had taken what wasn't hers, never returning it, as if she was entitled. Not anymore, Marjorie thought. It all ends here. By evening, the house felt emptier, but somehow it also felt freer. The clutter was gone. The energy was different. Marjorie sat down at her desk to finalize some paperwork. Her eyes lingered on the obituary draft she'd been working on. Without a second thought, she deleted Leah's name from it. The decision had been simple. Leah hadn't earned a place in her life, and she certainly wouldn't have one in her death. As she hit save, the phone buzzed again. It was Angela. The LLC is set up, Angela said. Restricted access. The rental income will be managed securely. It's all in place. Marjorie smiled quietly, satisfaction settling in her chest. She'd done everything she could. She had made her decisions, and now the future was in motion. But as she looked out the window, a chill ran through her. This isn't over yet, she thought. There was a silence in the house now, heavy with the weight of what had been set in motion. And Leah and John had no idea what was coming for them. The doorbell rang, and Marjorie stood by the window, watching Leah and John make their way up the driveway. She had known this moment was coming, but it still unsettled her. The air was thick with expectation as Leah smiled brightly and waved through the window before stepping inside. She was carrying a dish, something that looked like it had come from a local bakery, all glossy frosting and cheer. Hi, Mom, Leah greeted with exaggerated enthusiasm, stepping inside without waiting for a response. I thought it would be nice if we all had a little dinner together. You know, just the three of us. I've been meaning to get us all together for a while. Marjorie didn't move from the doorway. She barely glanced at the dish Leah had placed on the counter. Sure, she said, her voice flat. I'll check my schedule. Leah's smile faltered for a moment, but quickly returned. She was used to the coldness by now. Her eyes scanned the living room, as if looking for approval in the air. In the space between them, John shuffled in behind her, hands shoved in his pockets, a slight air of discomfort around him. You know, I finally got that sectional we've been talking about, John said, his voice carrying a tone of self-satisfaction. Custom built. It's got that modern vibe, lots of space. It's perfect for the den. Marjorie didn't respond, though her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the hours spent putting everything in order, thinking about how nothing would be theirs. Not anymore. She wasn't sure if John even noticed her silence or if he simply didn't care. Leah set the dish down on the table with a flourish, trying to draw attention to it. We're thinking of naming the den after you someday, she said, trying to sound casual, as though her words were supposed to soothe the lingering tension. Marjorie stared at her daughter. The words cut through the air like glass, but she said nothing at first. She felt the weight of everything that had been taken from her over the years. Her patience, her generosity, the endless giving that had never been returned. "Start with the street corner," Marjorie said softly, her tone even, but the words hung in the air with a biting finality. "It's where you left me." The room went silent. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than before. Marjorie felt her chest tighten, the weight of her years of quiet suffering settling between them. Leah's face turned pale for a moment, her smile faltering, unsure how to respond to the words that had just been spoken. John shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers tapping on the table. Marjorie didn't look at either of them as she moved toward the kitchen. She didn't need to. She had said what needed to be said. Just as she stepped out of the room, Kayla entered from the hallway, holding a stack of papers in her hands. She paused when she saw the tense atmosphere, her eyes quickly taking in the scene. Her gaze flicked to Leah, whose face had turned a little too white, and to John, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. Leah's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected Kayla to show up, not now. Not when she was here with her carefully constructed act of reconciliation. "Kayla," Marjorie said, turning back to look at her niece. Perfect timing. Kayla smiled, though her eyes briefly scanned the room, reading the air. "I've got everything sorted, Aunt Marjorie. The estate files, the LLC paperwork, just like we discussed." Leah opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She blinked, stunned, and John seemed to shrink back a little, his posture stiffening. Marjorie looked at Kayla, a silent understanding passing between them. "This is Kayla," Marjorie said slowly, her voice clear, her gaze steady. "She's the one who's been helping me make sure everything is in order." Leah glanced at John, her face flushed with frustration, but she said nothing. John shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the growing tension, but he didn't know what to do. Kayla set the papers down on the table, the sound sharp and deliberate against the silence. "I thought it would be good to go over a few things before we wrap up," she said, her tone calm and professional, a stark contrast to the rest of the room. "I'll make sure all the files are organized and ready." Marjorie watched as Kayla took control of the space in a way that felt entirely natural. Leah and John, still stunned, were left to sit in their silence. As Kayla continued speaking, her words blending into the background noise of the room, Marjorie realized something important. The future had already shifted, and Leah and John would have to face it, whether they were ready or not. The door that they thought would always be open was now firmly shut, and the world they'd once expected to walk into would no longer welcome them. Marjorie had made her peace with it. They hadn't. Marjorie stood in the entryway, her fingers hovering over the keypad. The soft beep signaled the change. The old code Leah and John used to access the house was gone, replaced with a new one. She felt a calm finality settle in as she reset the security system. They had no right here anymore. This was her space now, and it was time to lock them out for good. The house had always been open to them, too open, and now it was different. She moved to the back of the house where Aiden was waiting. He was there to finish setting up the automatic rent diversion for the rental unit. With a few simple taps on his phone, he confirmed that the payments would go straight to Marjorie's account. "It's all done," he said, his voice steady, a sharp contrast to the chaos of the past few months. Marjorie nodded, satisfied. "Good. No more games." Aiden left soon after, and she stood there for a moment, letting the silence of the house fill her. Everything was falling into place. Kayla would move in soon after finishing nursing school. Missy was helping prep the guest bedroom for her arrival, and the house, once filled with the noise of overbearing expectations, was becoming something entirely new. A place of peace, of control, of purpose. Upstairs, Missy was painting the walls of the spare room, the fresh scent of paint filling the air. Marjorie paused in the doorway and watched her for a moment, her heart swelling with a sense of relief. The space was already starting to feel like home again, like it was meant to be. She didn't need to explain anything to Missy. They both understood what this place had become, what it would continue to be. Later that day, Marjorie sat at her desk, papers spread out before her. She couldn't shake the feeling of urgency that had taken hold over the past few weeks. Leah had gone too far. using Marjorie's name to secure loans she had no right to, trying to claim what wasn't hers. Without hesitation, Marjorie drafted the cease and desist letter. It was clear, precise, and final. She wasn't going to let them take anything more. She signed it, sealed it, and placed it in the envelope. No more silent tolerance. No more ignoring the breaches they'd made. Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it. The message was from Leah, no doubt asking about plans for Thanksgiving. It was always when it suited them, never when it mattered. The doorbell rang, and Marjorie opened it to find Angela standing on the other side, holding a small stack of papers. Angela was here to finalize the last piece, Marjorie's legacy letter. It was addressed to Kayla, the one who had quietly stood by her, who had never asked for anything but had always given when it mattered. Angela handed her the notarized document. "It's all in place," she said. "The future is secure." Marjorie took the letter, running her fingers across the paper. "For the ones who stayed home when I needed them." Kayla had earned everything, and now it was hers to carry forward. As Angela left, Marjorie stood by the door, the weight of everything finally beginning to settle in. It was done. The house, the legacy, the future. It was all in her hands now. Leah and John hadn't realized it yet, but soon they would. And when they did, it would be too late. The letter arrived in Marjorie's mailbox like a small, cold confirmation of everything that had been set into motion. She tore it open, her fingers moving with deliberate precision. It was from Angela. Marjorie had expected it, of course, the final step to solidify her protection against the relentless pull of Leah and John. The words were crisp, professional, and sharp. Defamation warning, it read at the top. Boundary enforcement. Angela had drafted the letter in response to Leah's recent attempts to undermine her, likely trying to cast doubt on Marjorie's decisions to solidify some kind of claim. It was a clear message. Enough is enough. Marjorie set the letter down on the kitchen counter, her mind already turning to the next steps. They won't try again, she thought, the finality in her chest filling her with a quiet sense of peace. They would never get past this. Next, Marjorie updated her emergency contacts, removing Leah's name from the list and replacing it with Kayla's. It was small, practical, but symbolic. It wasn't just about paperwork anymore. It was about the people who had truly been there for her. Kayla had stayed. Kayla had quietly offered help, shown up when no one else had. The phone buzzed as Marjorie sat back in her chair. She glanced at the screen. It was from a nurse Kayla had met in school. The message was brief. "I noticed your name on the trust docs. I didn't know you were involved in something like this. I'm interested in learning more about estate management." Marjorie smiled faintly. She'd mentored young women in nursing before, but this felt different. It was another thread being woven into her new reality, one where knowledge and power were shared, passed down to those who truly valued it. She knew what she had, and now she was teaching others how to protect what was theirs. A knock on the door broke her thoughts. She stood slowly, moving toward the front entrance. When she opened it, Missy was standing there, her arms crossed, but with a knowing look in her eyes. "You went from being ignored to becoming their cautionary tale," Missy said, half joking but with that familiar edge of truth. Marjorie didn't answer at first, just watched her friend with a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Missy was right. She had gone from invisible to untouchable. And now, Leah and John would learn the cost of taking someone like Marjorie for granted. Just as Marjorie closed the door behind Missy, another message buzzed on her phone. She glanced at it, already sensing what it was. It was from John, a last-ditch attempt at damage control. A letter asking for a conversation. "I'd like to sit down and talk," the message read. "We need to clear the air about some things. This silence isn't helping anyone." Marjorie stared at the screen for a long moment, her fingers tightening around the phone. There was a part of her that wanted to respond, to finally have that conversation, to let them know how much they had taken and never given back. But then she remembered the letter from Angela, the cease and desist, the finality of her decisions. It's too late now. She hit delete, watching as the message vanished into the void. Marjorie had said everything that needed to be said. The silence was theirs to live with, not hers. She set the phone down and walked toward the window, watching the trees sway in the wind. Outside, everything was still, Everything was quiet. Inside, her world had shifted. She had locked the doors and closed the windows on the past, and now there was nothing left to do but wait for them to realize. And when they did, it would be too late. The day Marjorie decided to make a copy of the title certificate, it felt like more than just a simple action. It was a final acknowledgement of everything she had built and everything she was taking with her into the future. The original document was secured in a fireproof box, but the copy she held now was something different. She placed it in a locked case, the cool metal heavy in her hands, as if it was the last tangible connection she would ever need to the house. She ran her fingers across the edges of the certificate, the seal as crisp and clean as it had been the day she first signed it all those years ago. This is mine, she thought, not with the bitterness she had once felt, but with a quiet sense of ownership. This was her legacy, not Leah's, not John's, hers, and she had no intention of letting them take it. Kayla was moving in soon. The guest suite had been cleared, painted, and prepared. It was no longer a room for visitors, but a home. Kayla had agreed to help out around the house in exchange for reduced rent, cooking, cleaning, and generally taking care of Marjorie's needs. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The arrangement felt right, the house now a space for those who had truly stayed. When Kayla first walked into the guest suite, Marjorie couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Kayla's things, books, clothes, a few old photographs, began to fill the space, making it feel more like a home than it had in years. Marjorie had always loved the idea of a home being a sanctuary, but for too long, it had been a place where she had just existed, waiting for something to change. Kayla didn't need anything from Marjorie. She didn't demand anything or try to take more than she was given. She simply showed up, and that was enough. John, however, was a different story. He hadn't given up. Every now and then, Marjorie would overhear him telling coworkers about still working on inheriting the house. He said it with that same self-assured tone, as though it was a matter of when, not if. It was almost laughable. He truly thought he would get something out of all of this, despite his complete absence from any real, meaningful part of Marjorie's life. But things had changed. John's words had no power anymore. Every time he spoke about the house, Marjorie felt the air between them grow colder. She didn't need to respond. His assumptions would soon be crushed under the weight of the documents she had secured, the truth he would have to face when it was too late. One afternoon, Marjorie made a phone call to donate half of her furniture to an elder shelter. The old sofas, the chairs that had long since lost their luster, were all going to a place where they could make a real difference. As much as the furniture had once meant to her, the house had become something different now, a vessel for the future. She wanted it to reflect what was really important, the care she had shown, the relationships that mattered, and the freedom she had earned. That same afternoon, a delivery arrived, flowers from Leah. There was no card, no note, just a simple arrangement of lilies and roses. Marjorie stared at the bouquet for a long moment before setting it aside. The gesture felt empty, like everything Leah had ever done to make up for her neglect. She'd never truly seen Marjorie for who she was. Not her mother, not her ally. Just a source. Kayla walked into the room, her eyes falling on the flowers, then on the space around them. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice soft but full of sincerity. Marjorie glanced at the flowers again. "They always are, but I don't need them." Her voice was steady, but the words hit with an unexpected finality. The sentiment behind Leah's flowers was hollow. Kayla, on the other hand, had filled this space with warmth and purpose. Kayla smiled and moved toward the wall, her fingers brushing over the new art she had hung. It was abstract, bright, full of life. Everything Marjorie had wanted for the house. Everything the house would now become. Marjorie stood up, moving toward the window. The house looked different now. Its foundation the same, but its energy forever shifted. "This is my legacy," she thought again, as if reminding herself that her past had not been in vain. She had built this, and now it was time for her to let go of what didn't matter, to stop looking backward. She glanced over at Kayla, who was admiring the art on the wall. "This place is finally starting to feel like home," Kayla said, turning back toward her. Marjorie nodded, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in a long time, peace. She wasn't waiting anymore. Leah and John would have to accept that. The door they'd expected to open for them had been closed. And this time, they were not invited in. Marjorie's birthday was a quiet celebration this year, a gathering of the people who had become her true family. Kayla, Missy, and a few neighbors who had known her long enough to see her for who she truly was. The house, once filled with tension, now felt like a home, warm, inviting, and full of life. The evening unfolded with the soft hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, and the laughter of people who had learned to appreciate the value of presence, not just the convenience of it. As the night wore on, Marjorie stepped outside for a moment, taking a deep breath of cool evening air. It was her birthday, and for the first time in a long while, she felt free. But just as she was about to return inside, the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the peaceful atmosphere like a crack of thunder. She knew, even before she looked out the window, who it was. Leah. Kayla answered the door, and Marjorie could hear the exchange from inside. Leah was standing there, holding a small gift, looking as though she had practiced the words she would say. For her mother, on her birthday, Marjorie imagined the unspoken thought behind the gesture. Kayla came back into the room a moment later, carrying the gift, her face unreadable. Without a word, she set it on the table in front of Marjorie. Marjorie didn't need to ask what it was. She could tell from the way Leah's actions had become predictable. Just another attempt to smooth over the years of neglect. She didn't open it. Instead, she walked to the door, holding the gift at arm's length, and stepped outside again. There, on the porch, she placed it carefully on the ground, untouched, unacknowledged. The door would never open for Leah again. Kayla watched from the doorway, understanding without words. Marjorie returned inside, her heart steady, a calm resolution settling into her chest. The message had been sent. There was no place for Leah here, not anymore. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the quiet settled over the house, Marjorie sat at her desk. She powered up the old camera and recorded a message for Kayla, her voice calm, but filled with a warmth she had not shared with anyone else in years. Kayla, when you watch this, know that you've been the one to stay when others didn't. You've been my family. I'm proud of you. And I know you'll carry on the legacy of this house. It's yours now, just as it was always meant to be. You've earned everything you have here. She paused, swallowing hard, but finished with one last sentiment. You've always been my family, even when they weren't, and that will never change. Marjorie saved the message, knowing it would be there for Kayla when the time came. The next day, Angela arrived to finalize the last of Marjorie's plans. She set up a memorial fund in Marjorie's name, one that would be untouchable by Leah or John. The final details were handled with the precision Marjorie had come to rely on. Everything was set. Later, Missy came by, looking at the house with an approving smile. "You're not petty, Marjorie," she said. "You're precise." Marjorie didn't respond. She simply watched as Kayla placed a small sign on the front gate. The quote was simple, but it said everything. Family isn't blood, it's backbone. Marjorie's gaze lingered on the sign. This house, this family, was now built on the foundation of love and loyalty, and it would never be undone. The door they once expected to walk through was now firmly closed, and Marjorie was finally at peace. The doctor's words were a quiet blow. "Heart failure has progressed," he said, his voice clinical, but Marjorie heard the finality. Months left at best. She sat still, the paper on the desk in front of her untouched, the words still echoing in her ears. Months. That was it. She had already suspected as much, but hearing it out loud hit differently. A quiet acceptance washed over her. She'd made peace with the end long before. What mattered now was what she had done, what she had left behind. "I've got nothing left to prove," Marjorie murmured to herself, staring out the window. The house was quiet, the life she had built for herself and Kayla now intact, secure, and nothing left to leave them. Her thoughts turned to Kayla, the one who had stayed when no one else had. As much as Kayla wanted to help, to care for her, Marjorie wouldn't allow it. She'd worked too hard to give Kayla the future she deserved. Kayla arrived later, her concern palpable as she sat down beside Marjorie. "I can take time off school, Aunt Marjorie. I'll stay with you." Marjorie shook her head gently. "No, I'm not letting you give up what you've worked for," she said firmly. "You'll finish your school, Kayla. You're not giving up your life for me." Kayla's lips parted, about to protest. But Marjorie held up her hand. "I've made arrangements. I'll have in-home care with some of your nursing mentors. They'll take care of me. You focus on you." Kayla's eyes softened, and after a moment's hesitation, she nodded. "I'll make sure everything is set up. I trust you." Marjorie watched as Kayla left, a quiet smile playing at her lips. She was proud of the young woman Kayla had become, strong, independent, and full of heart. The following day, Leah's email arrived. Marjorie read it with little more than mild disdain. "Why haven't we been notified about her condition?" Leah demanded. "It's our right to know." Marjorie felt a flicker of something cold. "Our right?" Without a second thought, she forwarded the email to Angela, knowing exactly what would come next. Angela's response was quick and sharp. "You are not on her care directive." Marjorie sat back in her chair, allowing the satisfaction to settle over her. It was simple. Leah and John no longer had a say in her life, not in matters of health, not in anything. The lines had been drawn, and they had crossed them long ago. She didn't need to say anything. The truth had already been laid out. Leah and John had lost their chance to be part of her life. The door had closed, and there was no coming back from it. Marjorie looked out the window again, her heart at ease. She had done everything she could. The future was secure, and now it was in Kayla's hands. The final chapter was being written, and it would be hers. Marjorie passed quietly in her sleep, the kind of peaceful end that most people only dream of. Her body, worn and frail from the weight of time, finally let go. There was no drama, no last-minute rushing to the hospital, no dramatic goodbyes. Just the stillness of a woman who had lived life on her own terms and died the same way. Her passing was simple, but the quiet reverberations it sent through the people who truly mattered would echo long after. The funeral was small, just a handful of people who had truly known her. Kayla, Missy, the neighbors, a few old friends from her youth. They gathered in the church, a modest space that was more about remembering than about ceremony. Marjorie had never been the type to seek fanfare, and even in death, she commanded nothing more than a peaceful, dignified send-off. Leah and John were not invited. They had no place here. There was no room for those who had taken her for granted, no room for those who had come only when it suited them. The door had been closed long before this moment. Kayla stood by the small wooden podium, her eyes scanning the faces of those gathered. She had always been the one to stay, the one who had earned the right to be called family. As the ceremony drew to a close, her thoughts turned to the words she would carry with her forever. Survived by her niece Kayla, who never missed a heartbeat. It was the simplest line in the obituary, but it encapsulated everything. Kayla had been there from the first day to the last. She had been the one who stayed when no one else would, the one who showed up when she was needed. Her heart ached as she thought of the woman who had given her so much. After the ceremony, Angela came to the house. She was the executor of Marjorie's will, and she had come to deliver the final documents. There was no fanfare, no unnecessary words, just a quiet transaction. The handing over of what Marjorie had left behind. The will was clear, as expected. Leah received nothing, not even a mention, no inheritance, no belongings. Marjorie's assets, everything she had been transferred to Kayla. The house, the accounts, everything. It was hers now. And then there was the final piece. Angela handed Kayla a small envelope, one that felt heavier than the others. Inside was a video titled, "You Kept Me Alive." Kayla's fingers trembled as she held the envelope, not knowing what to expect. When she played the video later that evening, she found a recording of Marjorie's voice, steady and loving, telling her everything she needed to hear. "Kayla, I lived because of you. You kept me going when no one else did. This house, this life, it's yours now. You've always been my family." Kayla sat in the quiet of the house, tears slipping down her cheeks as she watched the screen. She wasn't just inheriting a house or money. She was inheriting the legacy of a woman who had loved her unconditionally, who had shown her what true family meant. Missy sat beside her, a glass of wine in her hand. She rearranged the furniture of fate, she said softly, her voice full of reverence. Kayla nodded, her throat tight. The house was more than just a place now. It was a symbol of everything that had passed and everything that would come next. A home built not on blood, but on something far stronger. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, and for the first time in a long time, Kayla felt a deep sense of peace. The house was hers, but so was the future. Marjorie had given her more than just a home. She had given her the strength to carry on. The door that Leah and John had expected to walk through was closed, and now Kayla was the one who would stand in the doorway, the one who would carry the legacy forward. The final chapter had been written. The contest was swiftly denied, as Marjorie had known it would be. The no contest clause in the will had triggered, ensuring that neither Leah nor John could challenge her decisions. It was airtight. Their attempts to claim anything, her house, her money, her legacy, had been blocked before they could even begin. Kayla sat at the kitchen table, her hands resting on the will, the weight of it settling into her chest. She had known it was coming, but seeing it in black and white, seeing it legally bound, was something else entirely. There was no room left for doubt. The future was hers, the house was hers, and the decisions she made would carry the weight of Marjorie's final wishes. Leah and John would have nothing. The legal finality of it settled in as Marjorie's old life began to slip further into the past. Kayla's plans for the house were already taking shape. She decided to transform it into a rotating care hub for elder nurses in hospice. The home would become a sanctuary for those who needed it most, much like it had been for Marjorie. She could already imagine the nurses coming in and out, bringing their knowledge, compassion, and warmth, turning this place into a beacon of care for others. One thing remained unchanged. One piece of Marjorie's world was untouched, preserved in its quiet dignity. In the living room, Marjorie's armchair sat alone, facing the window, the seat worn but dignified. It was hers, and it was never to be touched again. A small plaque was placed below it, simple but poignant. It read, "You left me waiting, I left you standing." Kayla stood in front of it, her fingers lightly brushing the engraved words. She didn't need to look back at Leah and John. They had made their choices long ago, and now the house stood as a testament to the choices she had made. She would carry the legacy forward, not with bitterness, but with strength. The house, once a symbol of neglect and empty promises, now felt full. Kayla's hands had been the ones to guide it into this new life. But in the quiet moments, when the wind shifted outside, she could almost feel Marjorie's presence still, watching over everything. As she stood in the doorway, she glanced back at the chair. The room felt different now, the weight of Marjorie's absence more present than ever, yet oddly peaceful. The house was still full of life. It always would be. Leah drove past the house sometimes. Kayla could see her car slow as it neared, but it never stopped. Leah's eyes would flicker toward the driveway, then back on the road ahead. There were no more chances to speak, no more chances to change things. Leah had no place here, and she never would. Kayla returned to the window and watched the light fade into evening, the air crisp with the promise of change. She felt a quiet triumph, but also a heavy responsibility. This house, this life, it was now hers to protect, to build, and to carry forward. The door that Leah and John had once assumed would always be open was now firmly closed. There was no space for them here, not now, not ever. They canceled my ride to the cardiologist so they could go furniture shopping, so I rearranged the future and left them nothing to sit on but regret. The door had been closed long ago, and now it would never open for them again.